Welcome to another Kitchen Sink University. I'm Casey Rochford, and I'm here to talk to you today about some logical fallacies. I'm going to do a little series of them, and I'm not always going to present it in this particular way, but there's a few that kind of tie together in a particularly timely topic that I think really should be addressed. And there's actually a lot of logical fallacies that go with this one, but I'm going to keep it short. And we'll probably do a follow up uh, in this sub series of the logic and cognition series. So I'd like to talk about the similarities between fascists or white supremacists or white nationalists or whatever you want to categorize them as, and neo-Nazis even. And I want to take that group and compare them to Antifa, anti-fascists. The fascist side definitely has it wrong. Um, there's a way more complex things going on with their cognition there that leads them to believe that they are somehow superior for having a different level of melanin in their skin. Really asinine thing to go off of, but we'll save that for a kitchen sink microscopy, I think, because that's a little bit out of the scope of Kitchen Sink University. I'd just like to talk to you about the argumentative fallacies that exist on both sides of this fence. So I will start with the Latin word is argument ad baculum. No, not Scott Bakula, ad baculum. You know what? Let's just call it argument from strength, because basically you're strong arming your particular views onto other groups. You're inciting violence. You're talking louder than they are, and you might be threatening violence, or on the case of the other end, the Antifa, there's this movement about punching Nazis. Sight unseen, you've never met them. Someone just says, that guy's a Nazi. You walk up and punch him. No due process, nothing like that. You've just decided that this person needs violence inflicted upon them. You haven't really looked into it much. And whether or not you have looked into it, it's still not necessarily a good idea to just jump right into violence, because, I'll get into that. But that is one obvious similarity between fascists and anti-fascists. And it's really hard for a guy like me to be in the middle fighting on both fronts. Like, you're an asshole for thinking that you're better than some other race. You're an asshole for punching people and thinking that you're better than them, because, while I might agree that you are better than them, it's not cool to, be acting superior over any other one person. That's exactly what you're fighting, right? So I'll move on to the next one now, the argument from inertia. And this is basically what keeps both of these groups stuck in a rut, is that you stick to your guns, even in the light of overwhelming evidence to the contrary. Like, you could sit a person down on the fascist side of things and say, look, there is really no biological difference between you and a black person, or you and an Asian person, or a Mexican person, or, like you and a pig, for all that matters. Like there really isn't that much difference when you break it down to the DNA. Wouldn't make a lick of difference to most of them, but I would argue that for the some that might actually listen, it's worth trying at least. But anyway, kitchen sink microscopy. We'll get there. On the other side, you've got this inflated sense of self-righteousness, and they don't want to admit that maybe they weren't self-righteous all along. That's probably what's going on when you point out, like, hey, punching Nazis or whatever sounds all good and whatever. You're comparing yourself to World War II soldiers. A little bit of a stretch, a lot of a stretch, I guess. But it's not really righteous in the end, because there are diplomatic ways to at least begin before you start punching people. I'll admit, sometimes you got to punch people. Sorry, you just do. But anyway, you basically fall into this way of thinking where you don't want to admit you were wrong. And that is hard to do. I've done it before. I've changed my stance on things in the light of new evidence, or upon examining my own logical fallacies, which I'm certainly prone to. But that's something to be proud of. I think you own your mistakes, you've learned from them, and you grow. So moving on to the last one I want to talk about, so I don't run this too long, is the big butt fallacy. Oh, really? I cannot lie. That's not what I'm talking about. One T, butt, with one T. Big butt fallacy. It's like, basically, you will state something that everybody typically agrees on, like, hate's a bad thing. We shouldn't hate people. And then you'll say, but it's okay to hate these Nazis over here. And hatred isn't the same thing as hate. Ooh, well, that's moving the goalpost. That's a whole other host of logical fallacies that I could go off on in itself. But you're implying that a negative cancels a negative. That logic doesn't, it's not consistent. It doesn't apply to other things. You don't fight fire with fire, even though that's a saying to inspire you to go out and fight. When you actually practically think about that as an analogy, if your house is on fire and you start throwing lit matches at it, well, you probably won't make much of a difference either way, but if anything, you're adding to fire. You're just making the fire bigger. And, if you try to cover it up, you're just putting dirt over the fire. Those embers are still burning. You walk away from it, forget about it. It's out of sight, out of mind. And then a forest fire happens while you're not looking. So, there's all kinds of analogical thinking that you can take from that and spread off, that basically, no matter how you paint it, says it's not a good idea to just add to the hate. You're just going to fuel the other side, which in turn fuels the other side, and blah, blah, blah. You go back and forth, and nothing's ever really progressing. And it just regresses. It gets worse and worse and worse. And I think I mentioned this is like moving the goalpost, where you're basically changing the rules to fit your agenda. It's like, well, I feel frustrated about Nazis. I feel like the only course of action is to just punch them and get my frustrations out and send them off into the shadows so I don't have to see it. I don't have to think about it. Wrong. They're still going to be racists. They're still going to be assholes. They're just going to be hiding where you can't see them anymore. And they're still going to be working to oppress people of color or LGBT or whoever it is they're railing against. We don't want that. So I keep getting off onto these kitchen sink microscopy diatribes, and I really shouldn't do that because that's not what this is. I'll get off my soapbox now. I just wanted to give you some examples from real day or real life everyday things that are going on right now here in the middle of 2019. Sad to say that, right? Sounds like the 40s again. So those are some logical fallacies that you should watch out for in other people and in yourself. If you take a look at something that you feel strongly about and say, can I apply this particular logical fallacy? Does it fit with the way I'm thinking? Analyze what you're thinking. Like, really look deep. I'm not saying that you're necessarily wrong. You just may be communicating it in the wrong way, because there's logical fallacies for pretty much everything, and just because you have a bad argument doesn't mean you're wrong. That's a logical fallacy to watch out for too. But it's worth checking yourself. So that's what this series is all about, the Logic and Cognition series. I just want you to think about thinking about your thinking and thinking about other people's thinking, but try not to get too preachy to other people. Leave that to me, the guy with the channel. No one can punch me right at this moment, so I'm relatively safe on the other side of the monitor here. And I guess that'll wrap things up. Go ahead and leave some comments. I know I'm gonna piss off a lot of people with this educational video, but so be it. Check out our main channel, Kitchen Sink Microscopy. We've got some very short videos, minute microscopy on there, if your attention span is a little on the short side. So that's about all the time I've got for today. And thank you for listening, and check your thinking, and class dismissed.